Hello everyone, welcome to today's SilverlightShow webinar. I'm Emil and I'll present you the webinar presenter and the topic. Today again we have Gill Cleeren. It's probably our best presenter, I guess. It's like fourth or the fifth webinar, I don't remember anymore.
I think the sixth. So, yeah.
Oh, the sixth one, okay.
Yeah, I think the sixth.
So the webinar will take approximately 60-70 minutes and then we'll have a Q&A session. So prepare your question, write them down in the chat console and then Gill will try to answer them. If you don't have the time to answer all of your questions, then we'll follow up by email in the next business day. Also, please note that the webinar is recorded, so all the slides, demos, and the recording will be available on SilverlightShow.net within 2 business days. So, Gill, let's go.
Okay, thank you, Emil. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation here again at the SilverlightShow. And today we are going to discuss LightSwitch, whether or not you should make the switch to LightSwitch. It's my goal during this talk to give you an overview of LightSwitch and what you can do with it. And I think after the following 60-70 minutes, you will not really walk out of the room, but you will leave your laptop or your machine thinking about LightSwitch in a different way, I think. And perhaps some people will say, well, LightSwitch is something that I'll never use, and that's possible. But other people, on the other hand, will think, well, LightSwitch is something really useful for me, perhaps to build an entire application in, perhaps to build part of an application in. So you'll see what I mean with that as we go on. And I think some people also will say, maybe LightSwitch is not really something for me, but I know a guy within my company or at my customer that does things, perhaps now in Excel or something, that LightSwitch can really replace in an easier fashion. So you'll see that LightSwitch really has a few very good strong points where it can be used. All right, so let me first quickly introduce myself. I'm Gill Cleeren. I'm a Microsoft Regional Director and an MVP in Silverlight, and I live in Belgium, where I work at Ordina, which is a consultancy firm, and I mainly do Silverlight and ASP.NET project there. I'm a regular speaker, as Emil mentioned. I think it's the 6th webinar that I'm doing for SilverlightShow, but you can also meet me in real life at several conferences throughout Europe. I've written a book as well on Silverlight, and it's called Silverlight 4 Data and Services Cookbook, and I'm currently working at a new book, but I'm not disclosing too much about that yet. I've also included my blog and my email and my Twitter, so you can contact me afterwards, after this talk. So what are we going to be discussing? So I actually divided the presentation in 2 parts, well, apart from the introduction, that is. So first we are going to be discussing what LightSwitch is. I'm going to first give you I think a 10-minute overview of the LightSwitch platform, because some people, I think everyone has already heard about it, but some people really don't know what it is. So those 10 minutes we are going to spend at really taking a quick look what LightSwitch is. And then, as mentioned, I've divided the talk in 2 parts. So we're first going to take a look at the basics, and there are 3 basics. There's 3 basic things in LightSwitch. That's data, screens, and queries. And I'm going to show them together in a small demo. It's going to take about 10 minutes, and then the rest of the talk we're going to spend them at taking a look at a deeper dive into LightSwitch. And first, I'm going to actually take a step back, taking a deeper look at data, taking a deeper look at screens, and taking a deeper look at queries. And we're going to also take a look at how we can write code in LightSwitch and where we should write code in LightSwitch, how LightSwitch handles security, how we can deploy a LightSwitch application, and also, of course, how we can extend LightSwitch, because that's mostly for developers, a very important aspect, I think. Some practical stuff, as Emil already mentioned, but just to repeat them. If you have questions, we'll handle them at the end of the presentation. If we cannot do them all, we'll do the rest by mail, and I think all the answers of the questions that we haven't been able to answer throughout the Q&A session, we'll set them online at SilverlightShow as well. And the video will be, the presentation, I'm sorry, will be recorded, and a link to the video recording will be sent to you. So if something is not clear or you want to link this video, send this video to someone else, you'll get a link of the recording. And so, just to make you a bit jealous, by the way, it's very hot in here in Belgium at this point. I just read that it's the hottest place in Europe at this point. So instead of sitting outside in the garden, I'm presenting you LightSwitch. So I think we're going to have a good time, even if it's hot. Just to make you a bit jealous, it's very good weather here. Perhaps it's raining in your location. But anyway, let's take a look at LightSwitch. So first, the introduction. What and why LightSwitch? Why would I actually start using LightSwitch? And first, perhaps, what exactly is LightSwitch? These two questions, I'm going to make them clear by talking a bit about the, let's say, the target groups of LightSwitch. I think perhaps we as developers, we think that everyone is a technical guy, that everyone is a developer. However, that's not the case. Not everyone is a developer. Most of you will probably know a person within your company or at the customer who's perhaps a business person, and while he's a business person, he's technically savvy enough to do some perhaps development, or he builds a small application, perhaps in Excel or in Access or sometimes in SharePoint, even with some VBA code in there as well. So there are a lot of people that, while they're not really developers, they build applications. Not what we perhaps think of as real applications, but still they are applications. And sometimes in small companies, and that's something that I noticed quite a few times already in my career, is that those kinds of applications become an important application for a business. Perhaps even something that the entire business runs on, and it's something in Excel, and it's difficult to maintain. LightSwitch is perhaps a good tool for those people. It's very easy to get a hang of. For many things you don't have to write code. And on the other hand, if there is maintenance on this type of application that has to be done, it's going to be in a consistent way, because if the applications have been built using LightSwitch, they are actually, there's actually code behind the scenes that we can work with. Behind the scenes, and we'll see that later on as well, LightSwitch is using Silverlight, is using MVVM, and is using RIA services. So all proven technologies. Instead of using Excel, it might be better to actually go that way. Now, don't panic if you think, well, that's not something for me. LightSwitch is not only for the non-technical person. On the contrary, developers really can benefit from LightSwitch as well. There are a few places where I think LightSwitch is really good and LightSwitch is really strong. One thing that I notice very often is when a small application has to be built, the time to actually set up the architecture and everything that hangs around the application is sometimes so high that it takes longer to actually set it up than the budget is really capable of covering. So before you have even started writing the first line of code, the budget is already gone. In that case, LightSwitch might be a good solution. Also, and that's in my eyes one of the places where I would use LightSwitch the most, is as part of enterprise applications. And that might astonish a few people. I'm not saying that I'm going to build an entire enterprise application in LightSwitch, but I am saying that I think that LightSwitch can be part of that, of your tool set to build that application. How many times have you not come across a situation where you have to build administration screens for managing the countries and the users perhaps, and so on and so forth. And all those things, they cost a lot of time, while there is little business value in building screens for those. LightSwitch can really make it easy to build those parts of the application really, really fast and save you a lot of budget that you can spend on other things. So developers will benefit from LightSwitch as well as perhaps less technical persons. Okay, so what in the end is LightSwitch then? Well, it is a platform that allows us to build business application with ease. And those applications can run on the desktop and in the cloud, so on the web. And as we take a look at deployment later on, you see that you build your application and it actually is completely independent of where you're going to host it. If you're going to host it as a desktop application, or if you're going to host it as a web application, there's nothing that you have to keep track of during the development which way you're going to go. It just doesn't matter. It can be deployed on both desktop and in the cloud. So LightSwitch is basically a generator for business applications, an easy way to build business applications. Okay. Now, when we develop a LightSwitch application, building a LightSwitch app is really not that different from building a general application. We start by describing the data. In good development practices, you define the model first. If you do, for example, domain-driven design, you start by describing the model and you actually don't think of the database. You say, well, the database has to manage it itself. In LightSwitch, you start from your data. You describe your data, and we're going to do that in just a second when we take a look at the demos. You start by describing the data, and then you can create screens on top of that data. That's basically the way of working in LightSwitch, and that's the way that you start. Oops, sorry. That's the way that you start building your application. At that point, you have already a working application in which you can probably do the most CRUD operations, so create, read, update, and delete operations already. And just like in another application, after that part is done, you start doing the refinements. That first part can perhaps be done without writing code. And the refinements is then perhaps adding code, business logic, validations, customizing the layout, and so on and so forth. And after you've done those refinements, then the developer really has to step in. Perhaps the refinement block is something that even a non-technical person can easily do, because you'll see that it's really easy to write the code for those things. But the third part is the extendability of LightSwitch. That is developers' work, because writing extensions for LightSwitch is not really that easy. It's not difficult, but it is actually writing code. And Microsoft hopes that around LightSwitch there will be an entire ecosystem of extra components that you can plug into your LightSwitch development environment. And we'll take a look at those extendability options that we have later on. Building extensions for LightSwitch comes down to building custom controls in Silverlight. And there's many other options to extend LightSwitch as we'll see moving forward. Okay. So that's about it, what LightSwitch really is. Let's now take a look at the basics in LightSwitch. As mentioned, there are in fact 3 basics that a LightSwitch application is composed out of. That is data, screens, and queries. As I mentioned in the previous slide, you start by defining your data, by describing your data model. A LightSwitch application basically is an application that will manage business data. So you describe your data. There are two large options, two major options that we have to allow LightSwitch to connect with a data source. If you start a new application, so meaning you do not connect with an existing database, you can use the internal database in LightSwitch. And that's in fact a SQL Server Express database, a file-based database that you can work with. And LightSwitch allows you to describe your data inside of that database. The other option is having LightSwitch connect with an external database. Perhaps a database somewhere in your network or whatever, it doesn't matter where it is. But in that case, you are gonna build your application on top of a data model that already exists. So you can either describe your data inside of LightSwitch or already have described your data outside of LightSwitch. And after you've done that, you can start creating relations. It is possible to have inside of one application a combination of these two. You can have an application that has an internal database for new parts. For example, you are building an ordering system. You can build the orders and the order details entities, let's say, inside of LightSwitch. But you can connect with a product database that you already have. And so you can create relations between tables within one internal database, and you can also create relations between your internal and your external database. I'll show that later on. It is very important to describe this data model as much as we can, because based on that data model, LightSwitch will do validation. It will do all the overhead creating stuff like transactions, concurrency checking. All those things are done by LightSwitch when we give our data model to LightSwitch. As mentioned, LightSwitch can connect to an external database, but it can also connect to a WCF RIA service, and it can also connect to a SharePoint list. This is an extensibility point. It is possible, after some development work, to connect to another data source. We'll see that later on. So the internal database are already explained. It is mainly for internal storage, and it will be later when you deploy the application, you can deploy it on another database server. And as mentioned also, you can create relations inside of your internal database, between your internal database and an optional external data source. You cannot, however, change any external data model. You cannot change an existing SQL Server database. You cannot do that inside of LightSwitch. LightSwitch basically only can handle or can manage the internal database. The external one, it can only work with the data, but it cannot update or delete. It can update and delete data, but it cannot create relations between the tables. We'll see that later on. The second basic, is the screens. When you have your data defined, you're going to start creating screens on top of that data. And that's very simple. You have your data described. You say to LightSwitch, well, on this data entity, I want to create a search screen or a data entry screen, and so on and so forth. That's all that you have to do. LightSwitch will then generate the screen for you based on the model that you give it. You can tweak those screens. You can change how they look, the features that they offer. You can disable a button, add a button, and so on. There are several screens inside of LightSwitch out of the box available. There's the new data screen. There's a search data screen. There's a detail screen that you can arrive at by clicking on an entity inside of the search screen. There's an editable grid screen, which allows you to do inline editing of data. There's a master detail, so a list and detail screen. And as mentioned there, your own. It is also an extensibility point to add new screen templates in LightSwitch. We'll see that also as well. You can change, of course, how they look. We'll take a look at that later on in more detail as well, but just remember for now that inside of Visual Studio there is a screen designer. And this is not a drag and drop. This gives you a hierarchical view of your screen. You can also, and that's very special, change the screen while running in debug mode. And those changes that you make on the screen will be sent back to Visual Studio. That's something very special to LightSwitch. While running the application, you can change how the screen looks in a Visual Designer, and that will be sent back to Visual Studio. And then the third basic is queries. Queries are, let's say, the link between data and a screen. You have your data in a table. You have your screen that displays the data. Which data that is shown in the screen depends on the query that is run on top of the data. All right. Let's take a look at this in action. I'm going to open Visual Studio. By the way, if you have Visual Studio already installed, LightSwitch will install inside of your already installed version. If you don't have Visual Studio installed, it will install a separate version that is just capable of doing LightSwitch, comparable to an Express edition. Inside of my Visual Studio, I'm going to click on New Project, and I'm going to select LightSwitch. Of course, I'm going to select C#. And I'm going to create an application called Bookstore. It's going to be a bookstore. So in a bookstore, what do we actually normally have? Books. Books have authors. That's our business case for this first very simple demo. I'm going to try zooming in. Let's see if it works. It doesn't seem to be working. That's a bit... Okay, sorry for that. It just doesn't work when it's running the webinar software. So I hope you can see what I'm doing, because I cannot zoom in on this. Oops, why is it standing there? Okay. So here at the left inside of the solution, sorry, on the right, in the Solution Explorer, you see data sources and screens. As mentioned, we should first start defining our data model. And I'm going to right-click on this, and I have two options here. Add a table and add a data source. Adding a table will be done automatically in the internal database. Adding a data source, when I click this, it will open me a window in which I can select what external data source I want to connect with. As mentioned, this is possible to connect with a database, with a SharePoint list, or a WCF real service. I'm not going to do that for now. I'm going to use the internal database. So I'm going to click Add Table, and I'm going to add first an entity called Author. This is the internal entity designer of LightSwitch. And what does an author have? He normally has a first name, and I think that's going to be required. He has a last name, which is also of type string. He also should have, in my system, an email address. An email address, you normally think of this as a string as well. In LightSwitch, there is something called a business type. I can select email address here. Email address is like a small layer on top of string that automatically performs validation and formatting for you out of the box. Let's say that this is not required. And I also want my authors to be reachable by phone, so I want to store a phone number. And there's also a business type for phone number that also includes default formatting and validation and so on. And that is also not required. This is now my first entity. Now I'm going to add for this entity a screen. So I'm clicking on Add Screen. And for these authors, I'm going to well, let's say we're going to create an editable grid for those. So now I'm adding a screen to my application because the entity is not visible by default. I'm going to add a screen, and in that screen I'm going to click on, I'm going to specify that I want to show authors data, and it's going to automatically call this screen editable authors grid. So there we go. Based on my model, on my data model, my LightSwitch has generated my screen. And this is the screen designer. As mentioned, there is no drag and drop. There's only this, which shows you a hierarchical view of your screen. So at the top, it specifies that we have a rows layout. So if you know some XAML, it's basically in the background creating a grid which has some rows. At the top, there's going to be a screen command bar, and then there's going to be a data grid which contains also a command bar, and then there's going to be rows to actually show my data. I haven't written a single line of code, and still I'm going to run this, and if all goes well, we should be able to manage the authors inside of the application already. So it's building, and now it has created for me a standalone application. It is Silverlight code that's running. It's basically an out-of-browser Silverlight application. And I can start adding data here, as you can see, inside of this grid. I can also click on this plus sign here, and then it's opening me a dialog in which I can do exactly the same. I'm going to continue working on this one. This is that business type that I mentioned earlier. If I tab out of this window, it's automatically giving me a validation error because a business type says, well, this should be an email. So I'm going back to this one, and I'm going to change this. Oops. Okay, the software is acting weird, but anyway. So I'm going to change this, and so this is my email address, and in the phone field, because again this is a phone, this is a business type for phone, it also already gives me this formatting for me. So this is incorrect, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. Let's enter some values here. That should be a valid phone number. And now I can save this. There we go. And so this data is now saved. I didn't have to write a single line of code. Okay. Let's go back to the application. And well, let's add another entity just that so that I can show you how you can create a relationship. So for example, I should create a book entity. I'm going to create books, not books. And a book has a title that should be of type string. I can define a description that is probably not required, but, and like in regular Visual Studio, you have your properties window. I'm going to change this, which shows me some default properties. So there's a description in here. That should be, for example, a cover thumbnail, which should be an image. Thumbnail, that can be an image. That is also not required. Then I'm going to have a publication date. It should be a date time. That's perhaps also not required. Then I have a price. Price again is a business, or can be a business type. There is a type called money, which refers to, well, money in this case, and the price is perhaps required. And to finish off, we can have a category, which should be a short integer, and that's also required. On this entity, I'm going to create a relation with authors, because a book is written by an author. So here at the top, I'm going to click on relationship, and it's going to open me the add new relationship window. And so here I'm going to select that I want to connect this book entity with the authors. It's for the people who don't really know how databases work, perhaps a business person. It's showing what it basically is doing. It specifies that the book must have an author. That's the one-to-many relation. An author can have many books in book instances, so one author can have more than one book written. When I click on OK, you see here at the left that it is showing the relation between book and author. Okay. Now I can create a screen for this one as well. I'm going to quickly do that. For example, a list and details screen. And the information that I want to show on this screen is books. And it creates automatically for me this second screen. And let's to finish off, run this demo quickly. Okay. So now we have two screens instead of the application. The editable authors grid and the book list detail. I don't have any books yet, so I'm going to add my own book here. There's a description. Let's say that's a really good book. Right? That's a good description. And then there is the ability to add a thumbnail. So I'm going to select an image here. Let's take the cover. There we go. There's a publication date, which also has a date picker, has a price, let's say 40. There's a category, and automatically, because I created a relationship, it shows me the available authors, which in this case only one. There we go, and we have added the book to the database. And so this is basically LightSwitch in action. This is what you can do with LightSwitch. Build these kinds of screens, but you can go a lot further as well. And there's many more information that I'm going to show you now, but this is giving you, I hope, a very first impression of the types of application that you can very easily build with LightSwitch, you or perhaps a less technical person, a more business person. All right. So I'm going to exit Visual Studio for now, and I'm going to go back to the slides. Do remember that if you have any questions, just type them in the Q&A screen and we'll take a look at them later on. So I'm now going to take a step back and we're going to take a look at the exact type of application for the rest of the talk, but we're going to dive in much more detail inside of this application and what goes on behind the screens and so on. So we talked about data first. Let's first take a look in more detail to data. As mentioned, data is the heart of your app. So it's really important that you define it as much as possible and with as much detail, let's say, as possible. If you do that, LightSwitch will be capable of define or creating the screen just like you want it to be. If you add more detail to your data, the screen is going to be able to do better validation and perhaps formatting of your data and so on. There are a few cool things inside of the LightSwitch Data Designer. If you use camel casing for the names of your labels, it's automatically going to add a space between all the words that start with a capital. So all these small things make it really easy to build an application. We talked about business types. So in a bit more detail, what is a business type? The database behind this LightSwitch application doesn't know about a money data type. It doesn't know about a phone number data type. A business type is just a layer on top of a regular type managed entirely by LightSwitch that allows it to do automatic validation, automatic formatting of that data. Let me show you this. And you're going to notice that I'm going to jump very often to the application just to show you things, because otherwise it's a bit too many details to show you at once. I'm going to jump back and forth between the slides and the demo. So this is basically the same application with a few extras. For example, the books, or let's say the authors here. Let's take the authors entity. We had an email address here. And there we go, there's a properties window. There's a phone number, field, which is a type phone number. Automatically, because it's a business type managed by LightSwitch, in the properties window there's a small link to another window, phone number formats, which allows me to enter the allowed phone number formatting. So I can also test any combination to any of those formats to see if they are really valid. All those things are because I can use those business types. Business types are also an extensibility point. You can create your own business types if you need. There's also something called a summary property. Remember in the demo that I just gave you, the full demo, when I selected the author, when I was adding a book, there was just my first name. By default, LightSwitch will take the first string field of an entity as its summary property. However, that is in many cases not what we want, so we can create our own summary property. And a summary property is most of the time a computed property. Something that we say this and this and this field perhaps makes up how the entity should be shown. There's a little coding required to do something like this. Let's go back to the application. Here at the bottom, let me click here in the entity on the computed property first. I'm adding a computed property. I'm going to call it full name 1 because I already have full name. This is going to be a computed property. A computed property basically is saying whenever this value is shown, its value should be computed with this and this and this value. That means that I have to write code for that. Here at the top, at the right, this is the first encounter with code in LightSwitch. I can click on the right code button and on the arrow at the right side, and I can click on compute. It's going to go to code behind, where I can write some code that basically shows the result of this. I've done exactly the same with the real full name property, and I've set the result to the combination of the concatenation of first name, space, and last name. I'm going to remove this one again. Note, by the way, that all these are partial methods. Automatically, all this code is in the back created for me. I just plug into partial methods where I want. We'll take a look at that when we take a look at code. So I'm going to remove this one. And now this full name property is set for the entire entity. So when I click on the entity as the summary property. When I run the application now again, it will automatically take this full name property wherever it shows, for example, authors in a drop down. Because this is the summary property for the entity authors. So I'm running the same application again. Let's say that I want to add a book. There we go. So the author is now shown as a combination of first name, space, last name, because that is now the summary property. All right. IDs are integer by default in LightSwitch in the internal database. If you have an external database that you're connecting with in which they are, for example, Hewitt's, that's not a problem. There's also the ability to create a choice list, which for example, the gender should be a choice list. Let's close down the running application. Let me quickly show you the gender here inside of the author entity. The gender is a choice list. You can add a few values here, possible values that you say, well, there's not that many choices for gender, I think, so you just enter them by default. That's a choice list. All things that you can do on your data, as you can see. The final one that I want to show you is custom validation. In many cases, you have to do custom validation inside of your application. This is done by code. For example, let's say that I want to make sure that when a user enters a country, that this is in uppercase. I have to write some code for this. So I'm going back to LightSwitch and I'm clicking here on the country validate. And so first I'm going to check, so this code by default, I should mention that first, is automatically run whenever this field is validating. So whenever I tab out of that field. Then this code is automatically triggered for me. I don't have to do anything for this. This is done automatically. And so what happens then is I'm going to first check if the country field is not empty. And if it is, I'm going to add a property error, which shows me my error message inside of the screen. And then if it's not empty, I'm going to make the country field uppercase. So all this validation, validation in most cases will require me to write some code, but still it's very easy code because all the things that you need are there for you. The add property error and the results, which is of entity validation result builder, automatically are there for you. You really don't have to do anything special for that. Okay. Let's go back to the slides. If you want, and in many cases you are going to need this, that your data is filtered or sorted, you can do that by changing the query. I've not shown you really how queries work, but you probably understand what the query is. Behind the screen that shows data, there's a query. You can change that query. You can change a query per screen, or you can also create what is called a global query, which is a query that is capable of being executed on several screens. Let me show you a query. For example, the editable authors grid screen, this one, as you see here on the left, I can click on the edit query. There is a query behind this screen that gets the data and shows the authors on the screen. So I can click on this and I can change that query. I can add, for example, a sort. I can say sort them by country descending, or sort them by email ascending. I can do all those things. That's exactly what I did in this ordered authors screen. I change the query. This is a screen query that is being changed. If I want, I can also create what is called a global query by right-clicking on one of the entities and say add a query. That's what I've done for this one. And this query I can reuse on several screens. I can say this sort by email query. It's basically a query that gives me back all authors, but I'm going to say sort by email ascending. And you see here it is based on the authors query, the default query. And on these queries I can also create a screen. I can say add a screen, doesn't matter which screen, and I can base a screen out of a query. So it's going to create me a screen automatically on this global query. So queries are basically there to allow you to specify how the data should be retrieved from the data source. Okay. In the beginning I already mentioned the fact that your data is can come from two places. The internal database, what we did up until now, use the internal file-based SQL Server Express database, or you can also connect to an external data source. Between the internal tables, we can create relations. We can also create relations between an internal and an external one. Let me show you. In this demo, there is the internal database, that's the application data. It's only possible to have one internal database per application. But then I can also right-click here and say add a data source, which will automatically create me a link to an external database or a SharePoint cluster or WCF via service. That's what I've done here with the Publishers DB database. This is an external database that is that I can also manage for my application. My book entity, my internal book entity, is linked with the publishers table. As you can see, I've added a relationship here, and I can just select publisher in the exact same way as I can link to a book. But since LightSwitch knows that it's an external database, it shows it with the dotted line, dashed line. So this way I'm seeing that I'm now linking my book entity to an external publisher entity. And so this publisher entity I can manage just in the exact same way. I can add publishers if I want to. I can delete publishers. But I cannot create a relationship between, for example, publishers and country. I cannot manage this external entity in the exact same way as my internal was, because LightSwitch doesn't allow you to change the model of the external data. That is not possible. All right, I'm going to skip a few slides here. Let me quickly go to, well, that's about it for data. I've seen the most important things. There's some more information in the slides. You can read them later on, but there was no demo in there anymore, so I'm going to skip those. Okay. Okay, let's now take a look in a bit more detail to screens. As we already saw, out of the box, LightSwitch doesn't have a drag and drop interface to create your screen. So there's no toolbox that you can select a text box and a combo box and I don't know what. That doesn't exist in LightSwitch. What you have is the screen designers, and that shows you a hierarchy of your screen. You can, however, in the screen designer, add items, for example, add a new query, change the buttons that you see on the screen, change the custom controls. By default, it will show, for example, an address as a text field, but you can change it to be a map, for example, change where they are positioned on the screen, and so on. Let me show you. I'm going to switch demos. Yes, save that. Let's go to screens. All right. So again, same demo, but with a few things prepared already in there. For example, let us take a look at the book, the author screen, the ordered author screen. That's the one that I want to show you. this screen has a rows layout of authors, and then it is screen command bar and a data grid with authors. I can say that I want to add a second query on this screen. For example, I click on this add item button, and I'm going to say on this same screen I also want to view my authors sorted by email. So I'm going to add a new query to this screen. Automatically on the left in the, let's say, toolbox, this screen is added. And now on my screen I can say, well, show me the sort by email query as the data grid. And let's run this now. So that is the authors screen that we should take a look at. There should now be two data grids on there. So let's take a look at the authors ordered screen. And as you can see, there's two queries on there. I can change that in my screen designer. I can add or remove queries and then show them on the screen somewhere. I can also change fields, but I think that's quite logical how to do that. Now, something that might be a bit more astonishing is that while running the application, I can also change the screen. So while running in the debugger, I can change my screen. And when I'm doing that, I have a visual preview of how my screen is going to look. Let's take a look at that. That's exactly why I left the application open. Here at the right, we have a design screen button. And I click on this, and LightSwitch will open me the customization mode, in which I again see that preview of my screen. I can, for example, change here that I want to view my screen now as, let's say, a columns layout. There we go. I automatically see what I'm doing. Let's save this. This is how the screen now looks. And let me close down the running application. Let's go back to Visual Studio. There we go. And you see that my changes that I did in the running application are persisted inside of Visual Studio as well. That's a really cool feature, I think. And those two can be used back and forth to create the screens that you want. All right. There's many types of screens available. You've seen quite a few already now. For example, out of the box you get a search screen for free, which is always quite difficult to create. That exports to Excel, that searches in all the fields of that entity. So all those things you don't have to develop yourself. They're available for you out of the box. It's also possible, for example, to create a master detail screen in which you can search, for example, for a book, click on that book, go to the author screen, and then get a link back to the first to the author of that book. Let me show you the master detail in more than one screen. You can also create a master detail using just a list and detail screen, so on one screen, but you can create more than one screen to create a better user experience for that master detail scenario, which is something that you often have. Let me run the application and show you what I mean with the master detail screens. So we have, for example, let's say the search books screen. This gives me a list of all the books that are currently in the database. I click on one of those books, I go to the detail screen. On that detail screen, I can add a link back to the author screen, showing me a list of all the books. And when that of that author, and when I click on one of those books, I go back to the already open detail screen of the book. So it's really easy to create that out of the box with LightSwitch. Okay, let's go back here. So we've seen the demos of screens. Let's very briefly take a look at queries. So I already mentioned that you can create queries yourself using the query designer. That allows you to add filters, add sorting, and add some parameters. But not everything is possible inside of this query designer. You can, for example, not do things like a count and a sum. That's not possible. If you need to do that kind of things, you need to write some code. Let me show you quickly how we can do that. Let's close the previous demo down and let's go to queries. Okay. So I have this filter books query. So I have my books entity still. And on this query, I created a query, and that's called filter books. This is the designer. In here, I can add filters, I can add sort, and I can add parameters. But I cannot do stuff like, say, take the first two, for example. I only take the top two. If I want to do that, I need to write some code. So I'm going to write some code here. Clicking on the Write Code button will take me immediately to the code editor, which is the normal code editor for Visual Studio. And in here, for my query, I can hook into the query right before it's being executed. So this is the filter books underscore pre-process query, which will be executed automatically. I don't have to do anything for that before the query is running. I get a reference to the query, and I'm going to say, using a normal link statement, just take the first two. So this allows me to hook into the query before it's being executed. I can do all kinds of things. This is just basic link syntax that you can use inside of LightSwitch to do stuff with your query. Behind, for the people who really know what's being done, I want to know what's being done, let's say. This is an iQueryable that is being appended with the extra parameters that I want to execute on my query. So it is the because it's an iQueryable on the database, it's gonna do the optimal query. It's not gonna, for example, get all the books and then just take the first two. It's gonna execute on the database a query that only takes the first two. So it's gonna be the optimal query of the database as well. All right. Now, we already saw quite a few places where we could write code. The general rule in LightSwitch is you can do a lot of things without writing code, but in quite a few cases, you're going to have to write code. If you want to do business rules, if you want to do validation, you're going to have to write some code. Inside of LightSwitch, this is the general, the normal code editor. You can write your code in C# or VB. It's basically Silverlight that is being executed, so it's just Silverlight that's running, and VB or C# code that you have to write. We've seen this, the last bullet on this one already. The code that I'm writing, I always write it in partial, already created methods that are already created by LightSwitch. So LightSwitch automatically generates many partial methods. And I can just write code in there. These methods are automatically called by the framework. And so if I add a business rule or add a validation or whatever, it's automatically picking those things up. It's doing that in the entities, it's doing that in the screens, it's doing that in the queries. So in the basic tree building blocks of a LightSwitch application, those default partial methods are generated for me. If you take a look at data, so on an entity, what is being generated? There are methods that are run automatically when you add an entity, when you delete an entity, when you edit an entity. There is also access control being run every time that you do something. And an access control, with that I mean a method that checks if the user that is running the application has permission, for example, to delete an entity. We'll take a look at those later on. Also, on the screens, there are methods automatically being executed. When I click on a button, automatically, and that's quite logical, a method is called. When I go to a screen, there's again a method run that checks if the user that is running the application has the permission to see that screen. As the developer, I don't have to worry about these calls being made. They are automatically executed for me. I just write my code inside of those default methods. If you start writing very complex LightSwitch applications, you of course may have to go outside of these default methods. Let me show you these in action. Let's go to coding LightSwitch demo. And let me show you a few places where you can write code or you can hook into this process. For example, let's take the books entity. Come on, books entity, please. There you go. For some things you may not have to write code. Some validation you can do in the designer. For example, this ISBN code, I'm going to say that the maximum length here at the bottom right is 10, for example. I can do that in the designer. But assume, and I really don't know how this logic is, but assume that there is an ISBN 13 code, is a concatenation of a string plus the ISBN code. If I want to make that, that's a computed property. I select this property, I click on the right code button, I click on the compute, and this compute method here that specifies that the result is a concatenation of ABC plus the ISBN code is automatically run for me when this ISBN 13 field is being shown. I don't have to do anything else for that. If I want to do validation of the publication date, why not? I just go to the validate method here that is automatically triggered for me, and in here I'm going to check if the publication date is not in the future, and if it is in the future I'm going to add a property error making sure that the validation fails. This is code on the entities. We can also write code on the screens. For example, let me go to the message, to the book detail screen. This screen, book detail, let me open the screen. So there is the command bar, which contains the buttons that my screen has. I have deleted in this case the default buttons, but I have added on this screen a custom button. It's a new button. Whatever method, let's say. On this button, I can write code. I can right click on this, and I can click on the edit execute code. For the people who know MVVM, so the view model pattern, this is exactly view model that you see here, because it has the edit execute and the edit can execute, just like we have with the iCommand pattern. So if I click here, I can write some code here that, for example, checks if I really want to delete, and that's what I've done here. Delete custom method execute. I'm going to show a message box asking the user if he really wants to delete the book, and if he says yes, then I'm going to delete the book. So I am hooking into this deletion process. Instead of doing the default delete, I'm going to override this code. This is code running on my screen. All right. You may wonder, can I build custom screens? Yes, but in that case, you also are going to have to write some code yourself. For example, can I do stuff like hiding a field based on another field? That's possible, but for that you also have to write code. Let me show you. Let me first run the sample. I have built in this demo a book lending screen, so to lend out of books. And there is a checkbox on this screen. Let's go to the screen first. So book lend screen. There is a checkbox on this screen that I'm specifying, will this guy return the book or not? Because if it's not planning on returning my book, then I just shouldn't be entering an end date of the lend. So if I uncheck this one, it's going to hide the end date lend field. And if I click it again, it's going to show it again. So this, of course, requires me to write some code. So the book lend screen is a custom built screen. I just added a new screen, an empty screen, and on that I added my own rows layout. I added the book entity using the add data item screen, where I specify I want to show a book entity. That's how you add stuff to a screen. And then I added a start date length, end date length, and a checkbox. Sorry. Again, via this screen. I can specify to add a boolean, I can specify to add a date, and it's automatically going to add those as fields on that screen. So that's how you build screens. Now in the code, there's a few lines of code that has to be written for this one. Whenever the screen loads, I'm going to specify the start date length to be today, and I'm going to be expecting some good of this guy, so I'm going to mark this boolean field as true. Whenever the field the start date changes, I'm going to change the end date length to today plus 7 days. That's also some code. And then when I check the boolean field or uncheck the boolean field, I'm going to this changed method is going to be called, and in here I'm going to say find me the end date length and change its visibility to the value of that boolean field. So that's how I can hide and show things on my screen. So for many cases you indeed are going to have to write some code. It's of course a development platform, so you can write all the custom code you want. And so I'm going to very quickly show you security. There is, like in all other applications, an authentication system and an authorization system. At this point in beta 2, and we are currently at beta 2 of LightSwitch, there is actually 3 options for you to do authentication. No authentication at all, Forms authentication, and Windows authentication. In the properties, you can simply select the type of authentication you want. Then for authorization, that's based on a system of permissions. In the properties window of the application, you can change or you can add permissions. Simply a line of in a grid, and those permissions, you have to check those in code whether or not the user that is going to use the application has that permission or not. Let me quickly show you those permissions because it's quite abstract to grasp without seeing it. Let's go to the bookstore application again. And so to take a look at security, I should first show you the properties window. So I click here on properties and I go to access control, and for this I selected the forms authentication type of authentication here, and then I added a few permissions: can delete book, can delete author. So these are permissions that I create myself. They are not linked with anything else in the application yet. That I have to do myself. So I have to write code to validate those permissions. So let's take a look at where I use this can delete author. There we go. So in the author entity, I can take a look at the authors can delete, which is an X control method that's going to be called whenever the user wants to delete an author. And then this code is going to be executed for you automatically. Result equals this.application, which is the master object, the top level object of the application. It has a reference to the user, and it's going to be able to check whether or not the user has permission to delete an author or not. So you have to do this yourself. There is no built-in system that wires things up. You have to do this yourself. To manage users, when the application is deployed, the administrator can add users, can delete users, and can also add or delete permissions to these users. Okay. 2 more things that I want to show you. Very briefly, how we can deploy an application. Well, deploying an application, to do that, there's basically 3 options that we have. Either we do a desktop deployment, in which we run everything on the same machine, both the application as well as the database and the server components, all on one machine. That's of course the easiest thing to do. You can also do a 3-tier desktop client, which runs the application still as a standalone application, so as a Silverlight out-of-browser application. But in this case, the database as well as the server components are located on another server, perhaps in Azure. And the third one is an in-browser application. An in-browser application is also a three-tier application that user browsers to. It's a Silverlight in-browser application that connects to the server components and a database on a different server. So it's basically the same what you see here. And so the desktop two-tier deployment is an out-of-browser application that perhaps connects to a database on a different server, but this is two-tier deployment. Three-tier deployment just adds a web server in between, where the desktop clients are going to be connecting with that web server that has the server components installed, and that connects perhaps to another machine or perhaps the same machine where the database is running. And then web is quite, in regards to architecture, exactly the same. The only difference is in the browser deployment, it's going to be an in-browser Silverlight application. The desktop is going to be an out-of-browser application. To deploy, there is an entire publication or publish application wizard that takes you through all the steps to deploy your application, and it also takes you through the steps to deploy on Windows Azure. Windows Azure is quite not really complex, but it takes a few steps to set this up. It requires you to have a hosted service. It requires you to have a storage account and a database in SQL Azure available to do the deployment inside of Windows Azure. I'm not going to show you deployment to Windows Azure. I'm going to show you how you can quickly deploy on the desktop. I'm not going to show you all the steps because it takes a few minutes to build. So everything is managed from my project, and I built my application independent of the type of deployment that I'm going to do. I can even deploy an application both on the desktop and as a web three-tier deployment. That is possible. It doesn't matter during the development what type of deployment that I'm going to do. So when I'm ready with my application, I want to publish it. I right-click on this, and I'm going to arrive in the. Oops, no, it's already very far. I'm going to arrive in the publication or the publish application wizard. Here I can select whether or not I want to do a desktop or a web deployment. Let's now say I want to do a desktop deployment, or everything is going to run locally. This is where my application, where the installer is going to be located. Where the database is going to be, what the database is going to be called that I want to deploy to. I can optionally embed the .NET framework in the installer, and then it's ready to publish the application. I'm not going to do that. Basically, what you end up with is an installed application. I think it is in here as a bookstore application, which is an application that runs like a click once installed application. That's what I end up with here. So many types of deployment available with the same code base inside of your LightSwitch application. All right. And so the last thing that I want to show you is how we can extend LightSwitch. Now, LightSwitch has 6 so-called extensibility points. Which are these extensibility points? The first one is controls. The controls are out of the box, a date picker, a combo box, and so on and so forth. We can create custom controls for our application. These are Silverlight custom controls that we can build like we would build custom controls normally in Silverlight, and we can attach these inside of our Visual Studio LightSwitch development environment to use inside of our applications. We can add new screen templates. It is possible to create new screen templates. So instead of the editable grid screen, I can have my own screen template that matches better my my enterprise or my organization. I can add new business types. A business type, we've seen those in the beginning, the money business type, the email address. If I have a very specific type of data that I often use with a specific type of validation, it's easier to wrap that inside of a business type to more easily reuse that business type inside of my application. I can change the theme and the shell. They are quite related. The theme is like the colors. The shell is the main hosting window with the top ribbon and the navigation on the left. I can change that shell. And I can also connect with another data source. I can write code to create a new data source type that I can connect that I can use to connect with for my application in LightSwitch. In many cases, you are gonna use a combination of multiple extensions. If you have a specific type of application that works a lot with money, you perhaps are gonna use a shell that is that has specific navigation that allows easier switching between the screens. Perhaps there are gonna be a few business types to manage money types more easily. Perhaps a custom data source. Perhaps a custom theme. In many cases, you are gonna build a combination of those for tailoring the application to the customer needs. Let me show you these in a few screenshots. Controls, for example, I'm going to show you that one live. For example, a Bing map control allows me to, instead of showing an address just as text, I'm going to show it on a map. Business types. Business types, as mentioned, is just like an extra validation or formatting layer. I can create custom business types for my application. A screen template, you see here at the bottom there is a catalog search screen and a catalog detail screen, which are new types of screens, templates. Theming and a shell. So this is the custom shell. You can go all the way, you can go very far in creating a new type of hosting shell for your application. That includes the navigation, for example. And you can also theme your application like just the way you want. Change the colors. And a custom data source. If you have specific needs in regards to your data source, you can write code to connect with a new type of data source. Let me finish by showing you this control in action, the map control in action. So this is again the bookstore application with a custom control for locations. I'm not going to show you the code to write that custom control. It comes down to, as mentioned, writing a Silverlight control and then writing a bit of Visual Studio extensibility code that creates a Visual Studio installer to install that extension inside of your LightSwitch environment. And you can see it installed, if everything goes well, inside of the extensions here. If you can see it, there is a Bing map control in here installed now inside of Visual Studio. I can use that inside of my application, and then it's going to be packaged along with the finished application. Let's run the application. No, let me first show you where it is being used. So in here I have an address which I would normally show as a text box, but now I've selected this custom control, this Bing map control, as the way to display this field. Let me run the application. And so, when we go to the publisher detail window, I have on my right part of the window the Bing map control working. This is a custom Silverlight control, and it moving to the correct location that I have in my database here. And this works just like on a Bing map control. I can change to aerial view, I can zoom in, I can zoom out as much as I want to. Okay, so with that, we are at the end of the talk. I hope that I've shown you how easy it is to build a great line of business application using LightSwitch. It targets both non-developers, let's say, business people that want to create an application that now do it in Excel. And it also targets developers that want to build an application very fast without having to go jumping through hoops, setting up an architecture, setting up a data access technology, and so on. Just want to write their code or just want to have their application ready. Or perhaps you can use it as part of a bigger application, a bigger enterprise application, using it just to manage administration screens. It's very fast to develop with it. You have an application up and running in minutes, as you saw me doing as well. It's also very cool, I think, that you have those several deployment options. It's easy to do the deployment because of the very well structured publish application wizard, and it is extensible. You're not limited to what you get out of the box. With the many extensibility hooks that it has, it's easy to build your applications just the way you need them to be. All right, so with that, we have finished the presentation. I hope I've given you a good overview, and let's now make some time for some questions. Emil, do we have some questions already?
Yeah, actually a lot of questions.
A lot of questions, great.
Yeah, you can see it in the
let
questions
me,
panel.
yeah, I'm gonna open the questions. Come on, let's open it. All right, so, oh, many questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's jump through them. So the Sure Hurlbird asks for the data design about concurrency. Well, concurrency is actually managed out of the box by LightSwitch. So it does that for you. The code, there's a lot of code being generated. I haven't shown you the code, but if you take a look at what gets generated, there's a lot of code being generated for you behind the scenes that manages concurrency for you. So I can remove this one now, so I'm gonna delete this one. Yeah, there we go. John Tomaselli asks, can you change the add screen? So changing a text field to display 3 lines. So what I think is that John means is in the editable grid screen, for example, so the dialog box that appears, can I change this to make it into three lines instead of 4? Yes, you can. So you can customize the default templates, screen templates, if you want, or you can create a new screen template based on one that exists. I think the latter is going to be easier for you to do. Do remember that this is not something that you do in 2 lines of code. This requires quite a few quite a bit of knowledge and quite a few minutes actually to get done. This is not that easy, but it is possible. You can change them. Lena Manjaris asks if this is creating a ZAP file. Well, exactly, this is creating a ZAP file. So basically what happens behind the screen, not the screen in LightSwitch, but behind the general screen, is it is indeed creating a ZAP file. The application is running, in my case, like I ran the applications, as an out-of-browser Silverlight application that is just being hosted in a window. So that's a ZAP file. If you create it as, or if you want to deploy as a web, or do a web deployment, it's also going to be a ZAP file. So in all cases, it is indeed going to be a ZAP file. And that is closely related to the question of Danny van Nijgen here, a guy that I know personally. Is the result of LightSwitch a web application or a Windows application? So it's actually both. So it's a ZAP file that is that you can deploy both on the desktop and or do the web deployment. And in both cases, it's actually the same ZAP file that you're going to be using. So either run as a standalone out-of-browser application or an in-browser application. Wait, no, I'm going to delete this one. Let me take a look at the next question. So Sure also asks, I see a lot of code behind in demo. Are there MVVM samples? Well, the thing is, behind the scenes, the code that LightSwitch is actually building is MVVM. like you saw when I clicked on the button where there was the edit execute and the edit can execute. So you are actually writing code, let's say in an MVVM framework, but I don't really think it is possible to write the code in LightSwitch just as MVVM. I don't think that's possible. And frankly, I think that LightSwitch isn't really aiming at that, because for MVVM you're gonna again do a lot of architecturing, perhaps, and perhaps also the application that you're targeting or wanting to build then is going to be more complex than what LightSwitch is aiming at. So I don't really think that's possible. Okay, deleting this one. Let me take a look which one I can take here. Cher also asks, is it mouse-driven only? Can I use accelerator keys? That one I don't know. I would, because it is code that is actually being run, it's actually Silverlight code. I would assume that if you build a custom screen tablet, you can, but that one I don't really know. Let me take a look at the other questions, the ones that perhaps require a bit more explanation. So Ralph asks, is there can entities be saved back to an external data source? So yes. So if you use, for example, an external database, you can. It will just create the CRUD operations for you. If you use specific things, like if you want to do validation on several entities, that of course requires you to write code, but you can indeed send code back to an external database. Oh, there's so many questions coming in and I cannot follow it, so I've already done. Wait, this one I've done. Jonas van der A asks a good question that I'm actually annoyed with a bit myself. So Jonas asks, how big does the application actually get? I've noticed an empty project took about 100 megabytes, and that seems quite a lot for an empty project. Indeed, so I think the demo folder is about 1 gigabyte for me as well. I've taken a look at what it's doing. It's generating the same, it's placing the same assemblies in quite a few locations in its generated code, which generates quite a lot of megabytes of assemblies. That is indeed an annoying thing, and this was less annoying in beta 1. The projects were big, but not as big as in beta 2. I hope they're going to fix it, because I don't know, but it is indeed quite annoying indeed. So I'm going to close this one down. Alina asks, can I embed a LightSwitch application into my actual Silverlight application? I think you can, but it's because it's basically Silverlight code that is being generated. Although the screen templates are using assemblies and stuff, so it might be possible, but I think it's going to create quite a lot of work actually. If you're more asking it in a sense that you can just display a LightSwitch screen inside of a Silverlight application, as far as I know, that doesn't work. Okay, let me close this one down. Do we still have time, Emil, to do more questions, or do we do the rest via mail?
Yeah, let's continue a couple more minutes and then we can.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So Lena asks another question, can I make business graphics? And you ask, are you talking about charts? Well, I would think that question is indeed about charts.
It's about charts.
Is it about charts? Yeah. So in that case, yes, you can. That is indeed, just like we did the map sample, that is the same thing. That would be a custom control then that takes in data and that displays data. It is possible, and it of course requires development. It's a custom Silverlight control, but you can. That is possible. That I'm absolutely sure of. Can I I'm going to close this one down. And animations, you ask about, Alina asks about, can we have animations? I think you mean animations for controls, perhaps a gauge of a control that perhaps goes to a specific value. In that case, that is possible as well, because again, it is a Silverlight control. With the map control, you also saw an animation of the scrolling, and it's basically Silverlight code is running there, and it's also kind of an animation. It's not really an animation, but it is possible. Let me take a look at which question I would like to answer. I did that one already. There's a few questions about dynamics that I don't know, and there's also a question about so there's another question about Firebird to an external database. I wouldn't know that one. So I've never worked with Firebird, so I don't really know that one. Daniel Frega asks, is it possible to promote the application back to a classic Visual Studio application? Yes, indeed, that is possible. On the other hand, I don't. Again, that is not what LightSwitch is meant for, but it is possible. It is creating the CS project files, so you can open those CS project files. It generates the code with the partial methods. You can edit that, and if you want, so if you want, you can dive into what is being generated and change that. It is possible.
Okay, maybe one last question. I think the last one about deployment is an interesting one.
Yeah, I just wanted to do that one indeed. So is there, Jeff Young asks, is there a package and scripted deploy option? So can we package it up and hand it off to operations? As far as I've read, I think there is a big blog post on the LightSwitch blog about this one. It is possible. I've not done it yet, but I think it is actually possible to create out of the box. The deployment basically creates you an installer, an MSI that you can use for click once, for example. So it is possible indeed to do exactly that. But take a look at the LightSwitch team blog, or it could be the Beth Massey blog, because she's basically blogging a lot about LightSwitch as well. And there is a lot of information on doing the scripted deploy options as well. So I think we should finish here then?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great. So the other questions, there are a few more that I'll follow up with by mail.
Yeah, there are a couple of more questions, but I will take them offline and I will post the answers on SilverlightShow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Jude, thanks a lot. I think this was quite an interesting presentation, judging especially from the answers, from the questions actually that we got. So, thank you all. Remember that all the slides and demos as well as the recording will be available on SilverlightShow.
It's going to be a 1 gigabyte download. Yeah, I will make them smaller.
Okay, maybe we can zip it and at least turn it down.
We probably have to. We'll have to indeed. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, and have a great time. And we'll see you on the next webinar. Right?
Okay. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye.